This morning I take great pleasure in introducing the man who my wife refers to as my husband. One of my very dearest friends, a longtime member of this church and this community, Bruce de Ste Croix.
How sweet, what a delight and what an honor. Thank you so much. For today's opening words, I've asked some friends to present the opening words for me. And while they assemble themselves, I'd first like to thank Kurt Reynolds for these beautiful sunflowers today. Thank you, Kurt. I dedicate this morning's service to the millions of people seeking refuge from violence, persecution, war, famine, poverty, and politics.
Love and compassion are necessities, not luxuries. Without them, humanity cannot survive. The Dalai Lama. Compassion is the keen awareness of the interdependence of all things. Thomas Merton.
If you judge people, you have no time to love them. Mother Teresa. The whole idea of compassion is based on a keen awareness of the interdependence of all these living beings, which are part of one another and all involved in one another. Thomas Merton.
Be kind, for everyone you meet is fighting a harder battle. Plato. It is a lack of love for ourselves that inhibits our compassion towards others. We make friends with ourselves. If we make friends with ourselves, then there is no obstacle to opening our hearts and minds to others. The Dalai Lama.
When you feel compassion, you dethrone yourself from the center of the world. Karen Armstrong. If you want others to be happy, practice compassion. If you want to be happy, practice compassion. The Dalai Lama.
Nonviolence means an ocean of compassion. It means shedding from us every trace of ill will for others. It does not mean abjectness or timidity or fleeing in fear. It means, on the contrary, firmness of mind and courage, a resolute spirit. Mahatma Gandhi. Look into your own heart. Discover what it is that gives you pain, and then refuse under any circumstances whatsoever to inflict that pain on anybody else. Karen Armstrong.
We are beginning to learn that each animal has a life and a place and a role in this world. If we place compassion and care in the middle of all our dealings with the animal world and honor and respect their lives, our attitudes will change. Jane Goodall. When we give cheerfully and accept gratefully, everyone is blessed. Maya Angelou.
All beings wish for happiness, so extend your compassion to all. The Buddha.
Today's prayer is a quote from Listening to the Cries of the World by Christina Feldman. We are always beginners in the art of compassion. No matter how advanced or refined we believe our understanding to be, life is sure to present us with some new experience or encounter with pain we feel unprepared for. Your partner betrays you, your teacher disappoints you, some event of unimaginable cruelty happens in the world. And once more, you are asked to open your heart and receive it. This also is the essence of compassion. Over and over, you are asked to meet change, loss, injustice, and over, you are asked to find the strength to open when you are most inclined to shut down. Today's reading is actually 2 quotes from Pema Chodron. We habitually erect a barrier called blame that keeps us from communicating genuinely with others, and we fortify it with our concepts of who's right and who's wrong. We do that with the people who are closest to us, and we do it with political systems, with all kinds of things that we don't like about our associates or our society. It is a very common, ancient, well-practiced device for trying to feel better. Blame others. Blaming is a way to protect your heart, trying to protect what is soft and open and tender in yourself. Rather than own that pain, we scramble to find some comfortable ground. In her book, Start Where You Are, A Guide to Compassionate Living, she tells a parable. One evening, Milarepa, who's probably the top of the Tibetan saints, returned to his cave after gathering firewood, only to find it filled with demons. They were cooking his food, reading his books, sleeping in his bed. They had taken over the joint. He knew about non-duality of self and other, but he still didn't quite know how to get these guys out of his cave. Even though he had a sense that they were just a projection of his own mind, all of the unwanted parts of himself, he didn't know how to get rid of them. So first, he taught them Dharma. He sat on this seat that was higher than they were and said things to them about how we are all one. He talked about compassion and shunyata and how poison is medicine. Nothing happened. The demons were still there. Then he lost his patience and got angry and ran at them. They just laughed at him. Finally, he gave up and just sat down on the floor saying, I'm not going away, and it looks like you're not either. So let's just live here together. At that point, all of them left except one. Milarepa said, oh, this one's particularly vicious. We all know that one. Sometimes we have lots like that. Sometimes we feel that's all we've got. He didn't know what to do, so he surrendered himself even further. He walked over and he put himself right into the mouth of the demon and said, just eat me if you want to. Then that demon left too. William Butler Yeats wrote one of my favorite poems. I will arise and go now, and go to Innisfree, and a small cabin build there, of clay and wattles made. 9 bean rows will I have there, a hive for the honeybee, and live alone in the bee-loud glade. And I shall have some peace there, for peace comes dropping slow, dropping from the vales of the morning to where the cricket sings. There, midnight's all a glimmer, and noon a purple glow. and evening full of the linnet's wings. I will arise and go now, for always day and night I hear lake water lapping with low sounds by the shore, while I stand on the roadway or on the pavement's gray. I hear it in the deep heart's core. When the time came for me to write this, I was hoping to find a quiet place away from the summer bustle on the Cape, a place where I could collect my feelings about some of my core spiritual understandings. To my delight, a friend, Jane, offered me an Innisfree. In July, I spent 2 weeks up north in Down East Maine on a small magical island in a huge lake. Each day, for the first 7 days, I wrote mostly poetry, though I knew I had wanted to use my time to write this sermon. Every day, I would dutifully sit in my tiny cabin under an eagle's perch and write an introductory page. And the next day, when I reread it, I knew that I had not succeeded. And although the time was interrupted by an exciting visit from Hurricane Arthur with trees down and no power for 3 days, my lack of headway was nonetheless frustrating. I'm usually comfortable writing what is on my mind or heart, but this time my thoughts and feelings were as numerous and elusive as the waves on the lake outside my window. The title of the sermon held up well and is, by an accident of good fortune, exactly what I wanted to communicate at every given moment. At every given moment, I can choose to be consciously present or not. My general philosophy is, I'm right here, right now, life is unfolding right now, so why not give it a shot and choose awareness? But the blurb I wrote for the newsletter felt like handcuffs, and its confines made me uncomfortable and preachy. The 3 notions in the blurb still hold true for me. I have come to believe that all of us are already aware or enlightened, but are often distracted from being present. That I can choose to participate in unedited, unfolding life at every given moment. And that my many struggles to control life are just my foolish illusions. But all 3 of these notions grew from a much simpler and long time coming foundation of understanding, my personal understanding of compassion. Discovering my sense of compassion has been a wonderful and terrifying adventure for me. There were times when I felt empty of compassion, incapable of compassion, or at least confused about what compassion was. I knew that if I were to understand, I first needed to differentiate my sense of what compassion was from its most common synonyms, empathy and sympathy. Empathy relies in part on imagination, sympathy on feelings. When I was very young, I would say ouch when I stepped on someone else's foot or bumped into them. People needed to remind me that they, the injured party, were supposed to say ouch and not me. Because I had such an active imagination early on, empathy came naturally for me. I could imagine the pain and startled reaction of those I injured. Webster's dictionary states, of all 3 of the terms, empathy, sympathy, and compassion, empathy has the least emotional content. It describes a gift, often a cultivated gift, for vicarious feeling, but the feeling need not be one of sorrow. It defines empathy as the imaginative projection of a subjective state into an object so that the object appears to be infused with it. Later, When I was about 10, my remaining grandparent, my grandfather, died. I was fond of Pa. He had gone night fishing with us, had a thick brogue, and told great scary Irish folk tales of pukas, banshees, and the little people. I was still too young to really comprehend death. I didn't know how to feel or what I felt. But at his burial, where so many were grieving and crying, I found tears and sobs taking over my body. That was my first clear recognition of sympathy. My tears were not for my loss or for Pa's death, as much as they were a oneness with the shared sorrow of the moment. For Webster's, sympathy is the act or capacity of entering into or sharing the feelings or interests of another, being sensitive to or affected by another's emotions, experiences, or especially sorrows. It is the inclination to think or feel alike, to share emotional or intellectual accord. Sympathy is the most general term, though, ranging in meaning from friendly interest or agreement in taste or opinion to emotional identification, often accompanied by deep tenderness. It seems to me that we can have sympathy or empathy without looking at ourselves. Compassion, on the other hand, requires that I know myself. Henri Nouwen, who taught at Notre Dame, Yale, and Harvard Divinity Schools, wrote, "Compassion asks us to go where it hurts, to enter into the places of pain, to share brokenness, fear, confusion, and anguish. Compassion challenges us to cry out with those in misery, to mourn with those who are lonely, to weep with those in tears. Compassion requires us to be weak with the weak, vulnerable with the vulnerable, and powerless with the powerless. Compassion means full immersion in the condition of being human." Dante's The Divine Comedy begins, "Midway upon the journey of our life, I found myself within a forest dark, for the straightforward pathway had been lost. And so it was for me in the middle of my life, the straightforward path was lost. Though no Virgil appeared to guide me, through an odd twist of fate, in September of 1984, I was diagnosed with a terminal illness. AIDS came and took my hand to lead me forward into a forest dark. I had lessons to learn. Throughout my life, I have been unashamedly empathetic and sympathetic, though I am not sure that it has ever improved my behavior. Most folks who've known me would also say that I have generally been a compassionate man. However, I think that I have only become truly compassionate much more recently. I was always too concerned about having people like me and the need to hide my vulnerability to be able to practice compassion. The lessons I needed to learn came from others. My teachers were those people I cared for while they died of AIDS, COPD, cancer, or old age. Each of them nudged and shoved me away from empathy and sympathy and onto the path towards compassion. Rarely did they want me to imagine what they felt, my empathy, and less often did they want me to tell them I knew what they felt, my sympathy. Over many years, these people let me sit with them through approaching death, fear, suffering, courage, humor, and laughter. A seed was planted. Witnessing them confronting our mutual mortality, I saw they were living examples of compassion. Even as time was fleeing, they shared gifts of life-changing intimacy. Mark Doty, who used to live up on Pearl Street with his partner, Wally, in the white little cottage with the white picket fence, in his book, Heaven's Coast, says it so beautifully. But we have, if not our understanding, our own experience, and it feels to me sealed, inviolable, ours. We have a last deep week together because Wally is not on morphine yet, because he has just enough awareness, just enough ability to communicate with me. I'm with him almost all day and night, little breaks for swimming, for walking the dogs. Outside, it snows and snows, deeper and deeper. We seem to live in a circle of lamplight. I rub his feet, make him hot cider. All week, I feel like we're taking one another in, looking and looking. I tell him I love him, and he says, "I love you, babe," back at me. And then, when it's too hard for him to speak, he smiles at me with the little crooked smile he can manage now. And I know what it means. I play music for him, the most encompassing and quiet I can find. Couperin, Vivaldi, the British soprano Leslie Garrett singing arias he loved, especially the duet from Lakme. Music of freedom, diving, floating. How can this be written? Shouldn't these sentences simply be smithereened apart, broken in a hurricane? All that afternoon, he looks out at us through a little space in his eyes, but I know he sees and registers. I know that he's loving us actively. If I know nothing else about this man after nearly 13 years, I know that. I bring all the animals, and then I sit there myself all afternoon, the lamps on. The afternoon's so quiet and deep, it seems almost to ring, like chimes, a cold, struck bell. I sit into the evening when he closes his eyes. There is an inaudible roaring, a rush beneath the surface of things, beneath the surface of Wally, who now has almost no surface, as if I could see into him, into the great hurrying current, that energy, that forward motion, which is life going on. I was never this close to anyone in my life. His living's so deep and absolute that it pulls me close to that interior current so far in his life and my own. I know I'm going to be more afraid than I've ever been, but right now I am not afraid. I am face to face with the deepest movement in the world, the point of my love's deepest reality, where he is most himself, even if that self empties out into no one, swift, hurrying river into the tumble of rivers, out of individuality, into the great rushing whirlwind of currents. All the love in the world goes with you. Now, Webster says that compassion originally meant fellowship in suffering between equals. It implies tenderness and understanding, as well as an urgent desire to aid. It also implies a greater detachment, a spiritual objectivity. Compassion is a deep feeling for and understanding of misery or suffering and the desire to promote its alleviation. It is spiritual consciousness of the personal tragedy of another or others and selfless tenderness directed towards it. Those many beautiful people who let me sit with them showered me with compassion. They taught me that awareness was a natural gift and that compassion was going to be needed in order to practice that gift. I began to discover that I was only able to be present and aware when I had compassion. That I would need to nurture compassion for myself and my humanness, as well as compassion for others and all of life. Quoting to Thomas Merton, "It is therefore of supreme importance that we consent to live not for ourselves but for others. When we do this, we will be able, first of all, to face and accept our own limitations. As long as we secretly adore ourselves, our own deficiencies will remain to torture us with an apparent defilement. But if we live for others, we will gradually discover that no one expects us to be as gods. We will see that we are human like everyone else, that we all have weaknesses and deficiencies, and that these limitations of ours play a most important part in all our lives. It is because of them that we need others, and that others need us. We are not all weak in the same spots, and so we supplement and complement one another, each one making up for himself for the lack in another. For me, compassion begins with letting myself be human, feeling as a human, fearlessly knowing myself as human, knowing my meanness and my kindness. How terrifying to find out how very human I am. It can be disappointing and almost embarrassing to find out how petty I am. How often my mind runs judgments non-stop. How generally self-centered I am. Accepting myself both as a part of a changing creation and just the way I am were my first steps on an ongoing journey. For me, compassion is accepting not just the world around me as it is, but being at peace with myself and the rhythm of life's tragedies as well as its joys. When I see the world with my heart open, I am better able to recognize that all in the universe, atoms to galaxies, amoebas to you, are worthy of love. Then compassion grows of its own accord. Being aware and present comes naturally. As Albert Einstein wrote, "A human being is a part of the whole called by us universe, a part limited in time and space. He experiences himself, his thoughts and feelings as something separate from the rest, a kind of optical delusion of his consciousness. This delusion is a kind of prison for us, restricting us to our personal desires and to affection for a few persons nearest us. Our task must be to free ourselves from this prison by widening our circle of compassion to embrace all living creatures and the whole of nature in its beauty." All of this notwithstanding, while I wrote in Maine, there were mosquitoes and horseflies buzzing about everywhere. And even while writing this, I killed many of them. In fascination, I watched eagles devour prey and loons gobble fish. But I also stepped over anthills and captured moths in my cabin to free them outdoors. I do what I can do. Compassion does not ask me to be perfect, unless we're saying perfectly human. It instead asks me to be aware and loving within my capacity. If that capacity grows, great. If not, then I don't want to wait until I'm perfect to be compassionate and aware. Life is short, so why not now? As the Dalai Lama says, now is the time for your action to be practiced. There are choices waiting for us at every given moment. Amen. Blessed be.